Calling from Newfoundland to our young men and women helping to keep the peace in a troubled part of this uncertain world. Mr. Jeff Sterling, Chairman of the Board of Newfoundland Broadcasting, and its President, Mr. Scott Sterling, through NTV and its sister enterprises, Oz FM and the Newfoundland Herald, are pleased to provide this program, keeping you up to date on news from home. In the weeks and months ahead, we hope to expand the program to make it a more complete information and entertainment package. We hope to include messages from you to loved ones at home, and from them, greetings to you wherever you are. For now, sit back and relax for this review of a full week's news of Newfoundland and Labrador.
Hello and welcome to the NTV News Week in Review. I'm Fred Hutton. Over the next 60 minutes, a look back at some of the top stories we covered over the past week. And we begin with the fishery. While Newfoundland wallowed in election talk this week, there was something that could have far more significant effects on the future of the province. That's the future of the fishery. They say it will never be the same again, but the difficulty of forecasting just what it will be was highlighted in a provincial government discussion paper. What Fisheries Minister Walter Carter proposed on Wednesday depends to a large extent on getting something for which there is no hope at this moment. That's joint management of the industry. Darren Rogers had this report.
It's called Changing Tides, and it's a Department of Fisheries produced discussion paper outlining possible policies for better management of the future of the Newfoundland fishery. In all, the report contains 39 policy recommendations, with many hinging on one of the essential policies, joint federal-provincial management of the fishery, a policy which won't occur, at least in the near future, according to the federal government. However, in the meantime, Fisheries Minister Walter Carter says government will improve its management over the processing sector by setting up a board which will control the licensing of fish plants and the refusal to license. With less plants to open in the future, government won't have to take the heat for closing plants down. Even though Mr. Carter wouldn't admit that was government's intention, closures will be necessary.
You know, it certainly wouldn't do to have every fish processing plant established on the Avalon Peninsula. So there had to be some regional consideration, but by and large, it would be a regulatory one. We're not hoping to, don't intend to try to play the part of the Almighty and go out and start to cherry picking plants that should or should not stay in the system. But we think this is the most practical way of doing it. Driven in a way by market forces, I suppose, and the availability of the resource and that sort of thing.
And according to government, there is still more bad news. 10,000 more people won't be able to find work in the fishery over the next 3 years. As well, the quotas will only increase by 100,000 tons by 1997. Government says to even reach those levels, 3 initiatives must be implemented. 1, the resource must be allowed to rebuild. 2, restructuring of the industry to a size that can be supported by the available resource. And finally, and most importantly, according to government, joint management of the fishery between the federal and provincial government.
Saying this report was predicated on, at some point in time, getting joint management, and we will get joint management, despite Mr. Crosby. one day joint management will become an accomplished fact.
Concerned people and groups will have a chance to analyze and make their concerns known about the discussion paper over the next few weeks at 14 public meetings. The province expects to develop its policy regarding the future of the fishery in 2 to 3 months. For NTV News, I'm Darren Rogers.
Still with that story, on Friday it seemed that joint federal-provincial management of the Atlantic fishery may have been close at hand. Federal Fisheries Minister John Crosbie voiced his approval of plans laid out in the province's white paper on the future of the fishery with respect to joint management. The key seems to be the fact that the province is no longer looking for a veto on federal fishery-related decisions. As we hear in this report from Friday from Darren Rogers, both provincial and federal fisheries ministers are optimistic about future agreement on the paper.
Through the release of its discussion paper on the future of the Newfoundland fishery, the province seems to be on its way to attaining joint management of the industry. The province's outlook for rebuilding and maintaining the fishery says joint management is a key element for success. Currently, the province only controls the licensing of processing plants, the Fisheries Loan Board, and some development initiatives. The federal government controls everything else from fleets to catch allocations. Under the province's proposal, there will be the establishment of the Canada-Newfoundland Fisheries Management Board, made up of 3 members from the province and 3 from the federal government, and a mutually agreed-upon chairperson. The board would oversee all fisheries matters, and when a decision can't be reached by the board, the minister currently responsible for the issue in question would have final say. Federal Fisheries Minister John Crosbie hasn't been in favor of joint management in the past, mainly because the province sought a veto over decisions. But he says the new proposal removes the veto, and that means there's room for agreement.
And since 90% of the money spent in the fishery at least comes from the Government of Canada, and if that's going to remain unchanged, then we can't be in a position where a province can have the veto power. But the province now says it doesn't want that, so I think that that's a step forward.
That opens the door to some kind of compromise, does it?
Yes, I would say so, sure.
However, Mr. Crosbie maintains the Government of Canada doesn't want separate agreements with each province in Atlantic Canada.
Now, we don't agree with a joint management board, and we don't agree with separate zones for Newfoundland and Canada, and Nova Scotia and Canada, and PEI and Canada, etc. But we do agree that our policies should be coordinated with the province and vice versa, and that we should be cooperating, and that each should know what the other is doing. And that's what we're prepared to do. We're prepared to enter into memorandums of agreement in these areas. So, I think that I don't see any insuperable obstacles to some sensible arrangement being entered into with the province.
Walter Carter, however, is optimistic. Based on Mr. Crosbie's response to the discussion paper, he says an agreement is now only a matter of time.
The interview, and I am encouraged by it, and at least it's a start. I think that's I've never seen John Crosbie go that far before in terms of talking about joint management. He's been very stubborn before and appears to have dug in on it. But at least now the door there appears to be a little tiny bit open. So let's see what happens.
Mr. Crosbie wants any discussion on joint management of the fishery to include all provinces involved in the industry. At this point, there is no time set aside for the province and the federal government to sit down and discuss joint management. However, they're closer now on the issue than they've ever been before. In St. John's, I'm Darren Rogers for NTV News.
Well, the fishery was not uppermost in the minds of all politicians this week, while opposition members of the Provincial House of Assembly hammered away at what they considered to be mini-scandals, like the famous briefcase caper and the furniture fuss. Government members had their attention fixed on the public sector unions. Strikes are threatening in the midst of election talk. And this week, the teachers seem to be backed into a corner, left with no alternative. Again, here's NTV's Darren Rogers.
The province's teachers have told their union executive that it is not to negotiate any form of cutbacks in current talks with government, pension-related or otherwise. Government is currently looking to save some $70 million from the benefit packages of the teachers and other public sector employees. Finance Minister Winston Baker said today he received the letter from the teachers, but wants clarification. He sees it as an end to any possible negotiated solution, saying that this sort of demand on the part of the teachers is unrealistic.
Well, what we do first of all is get the clarification that we want in terms of the approach of the NTA. I find it difficult to believe that they're closing off all avenues of discussion, that they're refusing to have anything to do with it, that they're hiding their heads in the sand and not admitting that there's a tremendous problem to be solved. I find that very difficult. I'd like to wait and see clarification to his letter.
But if that is in fact the case, it's now the 30th of March. How much time does government have?
If that is indeed the case, then there will be decisions that will have to be made.
NTA President Morley Reid says Mr. Baker shouldn't need any clarification. He says members have told them no cutbacks, and that's the position the NTA will take to the table, admitting it may force government to legislate, much like the past 2 years.
The politicians are saying they don't want to legislate. They would prefer not to legislate. I don't know if it is possible for us to come to any kind of a solution, negotiated or otherwise, unless government does legislate and take away benefits that teachers are unwilling to give.
Morley Reid says the members have put the executive in a tough position when it comes to negotiating a settlement, knowing the government says cutbacks are unavoidable. If the two sit at the bargaining table again and cutbacks are discussed, the teachers will walk away from the table and either go back to membership for a new strike mandate or take to the streets. For NTV News, I'm Darren Rogers.
The other strike threat facing government from the NAPE-CUPE alliance, totaling 20,000 workers, is just waiting to happen. The two unions reaffirmed their intention with an overwhelming vote last weekend for strike action. NTV's Jim Toms reported from their news conference on Monday.
There is a meanness. There's an absolute meanness among the workforce. They feel they've been done in.
All throughout the province, from each and every local, we sense the feeling of real anger.
That's the mood, anger and meanness. And the workers are straining at the leash to get on with the strike. But their leaders are holding back, hoping that more bargaining can defuse this labor relations bomb.
A labor relations situation that is quite frankly catastrophic. The potential for damage to everybody concerned is tremendously great.
They blame the situation on government arrogance, which they say rejects any consideration of union suggestions for cutting the deficit apart from the pensions option. The workers are not willing to give up $22.5 million and get nothing in return.
Our position to government is that it is clear that their approach and their solutions to the problems of the province that they have suggested up to this time are totally unacceptable to our membership. We will be going to the bargaining table in a serious effort, in an extremely serious effort to try and settle this problem.
We want the Premier to live up to his promise that free, open, democratic, collective bargaining is here and is here to stay. We're willing to sit down and try to hammer out a deal, if indeed the government is willing to hammer out a deal.
The NAPE-CUPE alliance thinks there's a government scheme afoot to sabotage essential services discussions.
I think there's a scheme in government, and that scheme is to try and keep us from striking. Should that time come, please God it won't, by somehow preventing us from ever negotiating essential services.
But Fraser March says it won't work. The alliance members are just not in the mood for it.
Our members are saying we have given all we could possibly give, and one nursing assistant said, I've given and I've given and I've given, I have no more to give.
In St. John's, Jim Toms, NTV News.
The stage is set.
Government reaction to the strike threats from the public sector unions is that one way or another, $70 million has to be chopped from the provincial deficit. Finance Minister Winston Baker is hoping it can be done without a strike, but he's not in any position to back down on trimming the deficit. More on that story now from NTV's legislative reporter, Lynn Burry.
11 days have passed since Winston Baker delivered his budget. He announced that $70 million would be taken from the wages and benefits package, and government was hoping that by now an agreement could be reached with the unions. That hasn't happened. In fact, both sides are moving further apart. In the House of Assembly this afternoon, the opposition wanted to know government's next move.
How do you propose to do it? Now that the NTA has specifically rejected the pension proposal, has the government ruled out a legislated rollback in wages or benefits as they once talked about?
I understand that there have been meetings held over the weekend and something will be communicated to government sometime tomorrow. So I've not received official notification yet of what their intention is, and I have to wait until I find out what their intention is. I assume that there's still room for discussions to be carried on.
Time is a factor, but outside the House, Winston Baker said there are no deadlines. He is still hoping an agreement can be reached. But if that doesn't happen, government will move on its own. Winston Baker says a number of options will be considered, including layoffs and unpaid leave.
The pension option is still there. The option of time off without pay, for instance, that Manitoba chose is still there, which in effect is temporary layoffs, you know. So all the options are still there, and I can't comment on which one we would choose. I'd prefer to wait and make every attempt possible to get some kind of an agreement first.
Also today, Winston Baker said a confrontation will not be helpful in the collective bargaining process. He says $70 million will be cut with or without union approval.
What I'm saying is that we don't have a choice. We must save that $70 million, and we don't have a choice there. And no matter what happens, that can never change. We will never bankrupt the province because of a pressure group. That cannot be done, and in essence, that's what we're talking about.
For NTV News, I'm Lynn Burry.
Well, it's time for a short break here on the NTV News Week in Review, but stay with us. We'll have more of the week's top stories when we return in just a moment.
I'm Beth Penny. Join me weeknights for the award-winning NTV Evening News Hour. And if you want a little bit of good news, on Monday evenings, we bring you NTV's Silver Linings.
From Portabass to Corner Brook to the Great Northern Peninsula and all points in between, join me, Becky Daly, as I tell your stories from the West Coast on NTV and NTV+.
Welcome back to the NTV News Week in Review. Turning to a strike that is underway and seems to have been going on forever, the dispute between City Council and its outside workers in St. John's was no nearer a solution. The key issue may have changed, but not the attitudes of both sides in refusing to budge. Darren Rogers reported on the latest developments on Thursday.
It happens in nearly all labor disputes. At some point in time, property is damaged and laws are violated. It's almost a fact of striking. In the end, the people charged are dealt with in court, found guilty or not guilty, and pay the price if necessary. However, in the current outside workers' strike, action against those thought to have done damage is the new issue holding up a settlement. Sources close to negotiations have told NTV News that the union wants amnesty for its employees and is willing to pay for any damage that might have occurred. The people in question would then just face a judgment of the court. However, that doesn't seem to be good enough for council. The city wants to be able to discipline their workers found to have caused damage to city property. Action could range from suspensions to outright firings, depending on the seriousness of the workers' actions. Sources say the two sides are at odds over the issue, and unless one budges, the strike will continue. There were more informal talks between the city and the union last night. Council was briefed on the progress late yesterday. However, another briefing session today was canceled for no apparent reason. On the matter of contracting out work in the Goulds, it appears it isn't an issue anymore because the city has given in to the union, allowing its employees to do the work, based on savings in other areas of the city's operation. According to both sides, formal negotiations are very close. However, getting there is a slow process. For NTV News, I'm Darren Rogers.
It was a shock this week at both ends of Canada as two Newfoundlanders were murdered in British Columbia. Police call the deaths of Craig Roach and Charlotte O'Brien a double homicide. NTV's Tony Marie Wiseman had more details in a special report from Tuesday.
Last Thursday, Craig William Roach and Charlotte Jane O'Brien were found murdered in their Burnaby, BC apartment. So far, police have not made any arrests in connection with the case, and that has friends of the deceased couple fearing for their own lives. In an exclusive interview, NTV News spoke with one friend earlier today. She has asked not to be identified for safety reasons.
I don't stop to talk to strangers, which I haven't done much of since I've been here. But I also keep my doors tightly locked, and I even keep the curtains closed. And I don't go outside by myself unless I have friends with me.
Are you afraid?
Yeah, I'm very afraid.
Their concerns are valid. Burnaby police are warning residents of the West Coast community to be on their guard.
Well, exactly. I mean, in a lot of these homicides that we investigate, we can establish a motive right away. In this particular case, we're unable to. We haven't had that luxury yet, and it's still a major mystery to us. So in the interim, in the event that it may be random, I've just alerted the public to be very, very careful and advised them not to open the door to anybody unless they recognize them as being a very friendly neighbor or person.
While police in Burnaby are cautioning residents, in Craig and Charlotte's hometown of Torbay, a former teacher of theirs, Jim Moore, has been helping students of Holy Trinity High School deal with the shocking tragedy.
Matter of fact, I sat down in the studio the other day talking with a couple of students that knew them, and we just sat down and talked, and they were saying that how the family was doing and how upset they were. But a lot of students walk around. Some students, I think, hold it in and don't express any emotion. But I think the general comment you could make is that it's upsetting, very upsetting to many students.
The bodies of Craig Roach and Charlotte O'Brien were set to be released by Burnaby police today. Funeral services are pending their arrival from British Columbia. In the meantime, their friends still in British Columbia remain shocked and confused over the entire incident.
I don't think any of us can believe what happened, let alone understand who could have done something like this. They were very nice people. They were quiet. They kept to themselves. It's just a real shock. I can't believe what has happened. I definitely don't know who would have done such a thing.
In St. John's, I'm Tony Marie Wiseman for NTV News.
There were two events this week that may or may not be related to the possibility of an upcoming provincial election. Government cleared the decks on widespread demands for relaxing the agricultural land freeze in the St. John's area. And they backed down on their earlier decision to withdraw funding for the Daybreak Daycare Child Centre. Agriculture Minister Graham Flight released the results of a land freeze study which, as NTV's Lynn Burry reported, had many people breathing a collective sigh of relief.
This is what the problem is all about, land that is zoned agricultural. Many landowners have argued for years that their land was not suitable for farmland. They wanted their property removed from the agricultural freeze. With mounting pressure, government decided to appoint a review commission, and today the report of the commission was tabled in the House of Assembly. The report has 41 recommendations and calls for 49 changes to the agriculture zone boundaries. Overall, more than 11,000 acres will be removed from the zone. 1,300 acres will be added. That will leave 31,623 acres of farmland in the St. John's area. People from Kilbride and the Goulds came to the Confederation building this afternoon to get copies of the report, and they were pleased with the recommendations.
What do you think of the decision today?
Good.
Yeah. What will it mean for you?
Mean that we can use the land that we have,
7 of my own and 8 grandchildren. So, most of the time, I'd be no trouble getting rid of a bit of land.
Oh, I'm quite pleased because we've been waiting 20 years now. Our land been frozen and we couldn't use it, couldn't sell it. So it's good that it's out of the freeze, at least that's one step.
One obstacle is overcome. We now got to conquer another obstacle, which is the City Council. We're trying to impose this 5-acre restriction in rural residential areas, right? Which we hope to accomplish soon.
Agriculture Minister Graham Flight is hoping that finally the problem has been solved.
And the mandate of the review committee was to do a review of the zone with a view to protecting that land that had agricultural value. And that's what the commissioners have done.
The best thing probably could have happened today was that the zone was completely banished, because right now farmers can't invest their money, and landowners who will get the right to build will have to fight the city anyway. So they have to step over, which is good for them, but certainly is not going to be good for the long-term agricultural activity in the Northeast Avalon.
Government has not yet approved all the recommendations. Graham Flight says the changes that don't cost money will be dealt with in a timely manner. For NTV News, I'm Lynn Burry.
They made a mistake. That's what Social Services Minister Eric Gullidge stated with regard to the decision to cut funding for the Daybreak Daycare Centre. A mistake, he said, to withdraw funding. Again, here's NTV's Lynn Burry with the details.
The Daybreak Daycare Centre has received a lot of attention since the budget was brought down. The centre's board of directors argued that Daybreak offered a service that was not available at other daycare centres. There were meetings with the Minister of Social Services and the Premier. Today, the board's efforts paid off. Social Services Minister Eric Gullidge said government made a mistake. The decision will be reversed.
Well, quite frankly, we're only human. Government is only human, and we made a decision. We made the wrong decision. We made literally thousands of decisions and had a lot of discussion in coming up with a final budget, including this Daybreak Centre decision. And this was not the right decision, and we admit that now. And of course, obviously, this decision recognizes the fact that we should not have taken the funding, the $500,000, away from Daybreak. It is a very worthwhile centre.
He changed his mind because the pressure was out there and everyone in the province knew that what the government was doing was wrong, and government realised they weren't going to get away with that decision, and he tried to save face as soon as he possibly could.
At the Daybreak Daycare this afternoon, little attention was focused on why the decision was reversed. Instead, most people were simply pleased that government had changed its mind.
Well, we go back to work. I mean, you know, as Melva says, business as usual, and we're just so happy that we can get on with work because everybody's working so hard. The parents, the staff, the board, everybody is just working so hard, and we're here for families.
We've had to put a lot of things on, aside, reports and work, and so we'll get busy now and work on that piece. And we had tremendous things in progress, child sexual abuse policies, in-service training for the community. So we'll go back and look on the desk and we'll pick up and go on.
For NTV News, I'm Lynn Burry.
On Friday, the provincial government released details on which third-party agencies will have their funding reduced or eliminated. On Friday, Finance Minister Winston Baker tabled the information in the House of Assembly. Organizations such as the Community Services Council and the Goodwill Centre are both facing reduced funding. With more on that story, here's our legislative reporter, Lynn Burry.
When the budget was brought down 2 weeks ago, the Finance Minister announced that funding for third-party agencies would be reduced. That would save more than $3 million. Since the decision was announced, opposition members have been asking for details, and today Winston Baker tabled the information. The groups or agencies with reduced funding include the Community Services Council. Funding has been reduced from $57,300 to $29,000. The CNIB has lost just over $100,000. Funding for the Family Life Bureau has been eliminated completely, and funding for the Personal Credit Counseling Service has been cut in half. Government funding has also been eliminated for the Federation of Municipalities annual dinner and the firefighters' annual dinner. For some other organizations, funding has remained the same or has been increased. There are other groups who are now receiving funding for the very first time. Humber East MHA Lynn Verge says she agrees with some of the changes, but not with all.
Some of the cuts to community organizations I think are very regrettable and reflect wrong priorities on the part of the government. For example, there's a major reduction in funding to the Community Services Council, a major cut to the Personal Credit Counseling Service. This is a time, obviously, when that's needed more than ever.
Finance Minister Winston Baker says the cuts are necessary. There simply isn't enough money. He believes the decisions that have been made are the right ones.
Decisions simply had to be made, and the departments made the decisions on the basis of the greatest need, which organizations serve the greatest need in terms of the programs of government and then what government should be doing. So there were some cuts, there were some eliminations, but there were also some new ones added. Unfortunately, we simply don't have the money to put into this now that we had before.
I don't buy Mr. Baker's argument that we have to cut somewhere. Yes, they do have to cut, but they have to cut where they're going to save money, not where they're going to cause themselves to lose even more money. And that, I think, is the problem with cutting a group like the Community Services Council.
Penny Rowe, the executive director of the Community Services Council, says the decision to reduce funding for the CSC is based on incorrect information. She says for every dollar invested by government, there was a 3,300% return. Ms. Rowe says along with providing services, jobs were being created. And last year alone, $16,000 was returned to the government in payroll tax. Now with reduced funding, Penny Rowe says the CSC will be forced to make cuts.
If we don't have the money, the grant from the provincial government, the $25,000, we're not going to be able to support the volunteer centre. It's as simple as that. And when I look at the enormous amount of good that that centre has done in this town for 15 years, it's really quite depressing.
Penny Rowe is comparing the situation to the Daybreak Parent-Child Centre, and like Daybreak, she's hoping government will reverse today's decision. For NTV News, I'm Lynn Burry.
We'll pause for a short break here on the NTV News Week in Review. Stay with us. More of the week's top stories when we return.
I'm NTV News reporter Bailey Howard. To hear about the issues impacting people in our province, from Indigenous affairs to job actions and housing, tune in to the NTV Evening News Hour at 6.
From oil and gas to wind energy and hydrogen, to the Confederation Building to Parliament Hill in Ottawa. Join me, Ben Clary, weeknights at 6 on the award-winning NTV Evening News Hour.
Continuing our coverage of the week's top stories, the special needs of special people were highlighted in several ways this week. Disabled people living in what are little more than slums and children living in poverty. The housing needs of mentally and physically disabled came up at a forum sponsored by what is known as the Mayor's Advisory Committee on this matter. NTV's Jim Toms reported from the forum on Thursday.
To live in a dump, to live in a slum, to live in the most depressing and gloomy and dilapidated place that you could imagine.
Wayne Sharp of the self-help group Channel was not exaggerating. That's how many disabled people are forced to live.
At the moment, the landlord spends a lot of his time drunk. I would describe it as a dump.
Debbie Marr lives in an apartment in St. John's, and she's found that complaining doesn't do any good.
Well, no, not really. I've been to the Newfoundland Labrador Landlord and Tenants Board before, and I was basically ignored. So
how does a landlord get away with it? Among those listening to Debbie was David Blackmore, the man in charge of the city's housing needs.
It may be possible that we don't have a file on that property. She can certainly register a complaint with the City of St. John's, either directly or through council, and we will investigate her.
So you do
concerns.
have a means by which, if she complains, you will take care of it?
Yes, certainly.
How do these landlords survive?
Well, I guess there's people are going to bend the rules any way they can. Sometimes it takes a very long time to get through the court process to enforce the rules that we have, and I guess some of the rules just don't meet the needs of our citizens.
In churches, they're always telling you to come in.
For a full morning, 4 hours of complaints, a steady parade of people with needs, including from the Short Stature Society, John Dunn.
If people of short stature are employed, is usually seasonal. On their salaries, they can barely afford apartments, let alone a mortgage for a private residence. They must be forced into a substandard housing because it is inexpensive.
Abuse victim Carol Crocker has worked extensively among people needing psychiatric help.
Many of our members here do live in housing that is not suitable, oftentimes for, I would say, people who have dogs, keep their dogs in a better shelter than some of our members live in.
That's what the advisory committee wants to change, using the forum and other ways to gather information, that will help to break down barriers facing people with disabilities.
There is a need. We do have people in the community who are currently living in accessible housing, but for people who access mental health services, we have less housing available. Very often when it's available, it's substandard, inadequate, and they're paying money for sometimes a little more than slums.
In St. John's, Jim Toms for NTV Evening News.
Child poverty. It exists in all parts of Canada. So much of it that now a national campaign is underway to devise strategies to do something about the problem. The campaign had a beginning this week in St. John's. NTV's Tony Marie Wiseman picks up the story.
The statistics are alarming. 1.2 million Canadian children live below the poverty line. In this province, the number of children living in poverty is 1 in 5. Various community groups across the country have initiated Campaign 2000, a drive to end child poverty in the country by the turn of the century, by increasing public awareness on that issue. According to Penelope Rowe of the Community Services Council, awareness is a key factor in conquering the problem, but she says the public must lobby government to ensure this issue gets high priority.
So I think government has to change its broad policies, its economic policies, its fiscal policies, its social policies, so that we are taking a whole new approach to the way in which this country is functioning.
Now the business community is becoming involved. The Body Shop and its 105 stores across the country have launched a 3-week Light a Fire Under the Powers That Be campaign. During the next 3 weeks, the Body Shop will be selling postcards printed with startling statistics on child poverty. The Body Shop will then send the signed cards to federal, provincial, and municipal politicians. In Newfoundland, the shops will also be selling T-shirts with anti-poverty slogans. A portion of the proceeds from the T-shirts will go to the province's school lunch program. Penelope Rowe says the business community should become more involved in social issues.
The numbers are just growing so quickly in this province that clearly indicates to me that we have to concern ourselves with producing more jobs so that people can earn adequate incomes. And I think that's one of the exciting things about getting the business sector involved in this discussion, because it really does, I think, finally get groups who are concerned working together and in a way that might lead us to some constructive solutions to this problem. Obviously not in the short term, but I would hope in the longer term.
In St. John's, I'm Tony Marie Wiseman for NTV News.
St. John's City Councillor Baz Jamieson was in hot water this week because of a couple of controversial memos that even he acknowledged were a bit off the mark. One threatened the dismissal of a parking meter attendant who the councillor felt was out to get him. The other seemed to put him in a conflict of interest in light of his employment as a late-night talk show host with a local radio station. More on that story from NTV's Jim Toms.
Conflict of interest guidelines are pretty clear for 292 of the 295 municipalities in this province. The Municipalities Act sets forth that a councillor shall not vote or speak where the councillor has an interest in a matter distinct from any interest arising from his or her functions as a councillor. If this happens, the council has a legal right to declare the seat vacant. The City of St. John's has its own act, which says much the same thing, except it doesn't set forth a penalty. That's about to be changed.
What is required is an amendment to the City of St. John's Act to cover that situation and to incorporate a stipulation where a member is caught in a conflict of interest and it is a blatant conflict of interest, then I think that the council has the obligation to declare the seat vacant.
Councillor Baz Jamieson is already in hot water with a memo expressing his frustration over getting parking tickets and threatening to have a meter attendant dismissed if it didn't stop. He later apologized to council for it. It may not be as easy to get out from under his latest venture. When an internal memo suggested calling the CBC Morning Show and the Evening Telegram to advertise a downtown parking survey, Mr. Jamieson put out a memo of his own, pointing out, as he said, that if the exercise was to let as many people know about the survey, then VOCM Radio has about 6 times the audience in the morning slot, and the 8 a.m. news has almost 8 times the audience. I wish, a VOCM official observed when the figures were quoted to him. Mr. Jamieson denies any conflict, but Mayor Shani Duff says there was. And for once, she and the deputy mayor are in agreement.
Oh, I don't think there's any doubt with any reasonable interpretation of conflict of interest that yes, I mean, he sought to personally advantage himself by having tickets cancelled through his office at City Hall.
Are you aware of the latest memo?
I got a call yesterday, yeah, and it looks like there's another example of where you're using Jameson is using his office to try and drum up business for his one of his other employers.
If City Council does decide there is conflict of interest, there's not much they can do about it, except perhaps a private or public scolding not to do it again. The OCM manager, John Murphy, had no comment, explaining his station was caught up in a City Council issue with no knowledge of it, though he was briefed on the memo this morning. Up to then, he had no opportunity to discuss it with Mr. Jameson. From City Hall in St. John's, Jim Toms, NTV News.
And what did Councillor Jameson have to say about all this? Well, he acknowledged in an interview with NTV's Jim Furlong that it was all a mistake.
Mr. Jameson, for the second time now, I suppose, in just about a week, you're in the headlines. First of all, the tickets, this latest incident, your other employer, VOCM, and council business. I know your explanation. There's an element in the word stunned comes to mind, for putting on paper thoughts concerning. Respond to all that.
That's
is
a good word.
How you feel?
Yeah, I think stunned is probably a good word. I don't really consider myself all that stunned, but certainly the first memo particularly was stunned. That dealt with something I had no business dealing with in that way, and I apologized for that, and I still feel very badly about that particular memo. I think it was a mistake, a bad judgment, and stunned. The second memo had to do with a traffic survey that was happening downtown in St. John's, and it was in the general agenda of council to the council chamber, so it was a public document. And as soon as I looked at it, it struck me that somewhere along the way there's something wrong with this. It indicated that they were going to let the people of St. John's know about this traffic survey by giving it to Craig Westcott of the CBC, of the Telegram, and to the CBC Morning Show, and have it covered as a news story. And that's fine. I have no argument with that. That's good. But it struck me that if you're going to tell the people of St. John's about something that's very important that's happening in their city, you better talk to the majority audience. And the majority audience, as the BBM indicates, belongs to VOCM in the mornings.
But the difficulty, of course, is that VOCM, in another facet of your existence, is your employer.
That's right. That's true. But, it was almost a gut reaction. I think a lot of people in this business would probably go the same way, seeing that, in fact, if I'd seen that memo and it left out the Evening Telegram, I would have done exactly the same thing. I mean, if it said, let's give it to the CBC Morning Show, let's give it to VOCM, and let's give it to something else, and they left out the Evening Telegram, I would have done the same thing exactly. Okay. Because you can't tell people of St. John's about something unless you use the total media.
Do you expect a crack across the nose now, as it were, from council?
Well, they can crack away, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, I have a lot of cracks that I could deliver too, by the way, and will deliver before November. But in this instance, I know perhaps it's a borderline conflict thing, but it's very borderline, and I think they're making a mountain out of a molehill.
Put them together. Sorry for the first one, not sorry for the second.
Sorry for the first one, but certainly not sorry for the second one, because it should have been done right the first time.
Thank you, sir.
The story of a Newfoundland hero when the NTV News Week in Review continues.
You're watching NTV, Canada's leading superstation.
A Botwood man has been honoured for bravery. Gower R. Langdon risked his life to rescue fishery guardian John Francis from a burning cabin last July. Mr. Langdon is a retired Abitibi Price Company employee. Both men are from Botwood. Severe burns have kept the accident victim in hospital since the fire. Federal Fisheries Minister John Crosbie presented the award on Friday morning at an assembly of DFO employees at the White Hills Fisheries Centre. NTV's Jim Toms reports now on the man who didn't want to be there.
Gower R. Langdon is a most reluctant hero, but John Crosby insisted.
He is a real hero, and heroes, of course, as you know, are usually unsung.
Mr. Langdon wanted to be unsung.
I didn't want to come.
He didn't have a word to say to the over 200 people who showed up to applaud as the fisheries minister presented a commemorative plaque. Even after the ceremony, it was most difficult to get even a few words from him.
Nothing to say.
Can you describe what happened?
It's all over and done with. Well, no other thing you can say about it. Only the building exploded and I happened to be there.
That explosion on Western Arm Brook in Notre Dame Bay would have killed fishery warden John Francis if Gower Langdon had not been there. As it was, the Guardian suffered extensive head and facial injuries. Mr. Langdon himself had injuries that took some time to heal, though only a couple of scars on his fingers are left to testify to what happened.
You haven't got the time to decide what you're going to do, what you're not going to do. That's only seconds you got to make up your mind.
Do you feel like you're a hero, as
No,
Mr. Crosby said?
not at all.
To rescue our fisheries guardian, to leap into a building which is all aflame is an act of real bravery.
Well, I think he did a wonderful thing, and I'm happy that John is doing so well. And his accident too, Yeah, that's great. He was very brave.
When you think back of the fact that he risked his own life,
That's true.
How do you feel about that?
Oh, he's so brave. I don't know if I would have done it, but I guess at the spur of the moment you don't think, you just do what you got to do, right?
Still facing months of reconstructive surgery for his injuries, John Francis politely declined an on-camera interview. But by phone from his hospital bed, he said he was coming along very well. As for Gower Langdon, the man who saved his life, he said he's a great fellow. Not everyone would do what he did. In St. John's, Jim Toms, NTV News.
We'll be back in a moment with a look back, the Newfoundland seal hunt.
Bringing the world to Newfoundland and Labrador, we reach more homes and families than we ever have before. New faces and familiar friends to keep you company. No distances to break, no home too far from your TV. Five stars shine bright on satellite. Future's here today. More information flowing on technology's highways. In Newfoundland and Labrador, it's all right here to see. From the world to your TV, UTV is MTV. In Newfoundland and Labrador, this fall.
This would normally be the time of year Newfoundlanders are caught up in the seal fishery. That's the way it was years ago, part of our way of life. It was almost a sign of spring. On Tuesday, NTV's Jim Furlong reflected on the Newfoundland seal hunt.
It is hard today, in 1993, to mount a defense of the seal hunt on purely intellectual grounds. If we had been a little brighter, we might have realized a lot earlier in the Greenpeace game that the slaughter of nursing seal pups would never play very well on an increasingly environmentally aware world stage. That the cards were stacked against the seal hunt. It was a relic of a bygone era and the subject of a public relations war in which all of the cards were in the hands of the other side. Interestingly enough, however, when that war, as it were, broke out back in the early to mid-1970s with Brian Davies and the Fund for Animal Welfare, the seal hunt was already, to all intents and purposes, finished. In fact, to find its heyday, you have to go back nearly a century or more. By 1910, which was 83 years ago, the seal hunt was headed downhill. That was the last year, by the way, 1910, when more than 300,000 pelts were taken. Think about it. 300,000 seal pelts in a single year. Pressure on a resource, the mind boggles.
All of which had little to do with why the seal hunt was so important to Newfoundlanders. It was, after all, an importance that went beyond economics. It was an importance that had more to do with the sometimes over-romanticized concept of wooden ships and iron men than it did anything else. It had to do with enduring, which really has been a concept that has pervaded life on this rock for 4.5 centuries.
Which brings us to this day in history, and this notion of endurance and this notion of the seal fishery as symbol of an ongoing struggle here in Newfoundland. For it was on this date, March 30th, 1914, that all 4 watches of the sealing vessel Newfoundland, under the command of Captain Wes Kane, were sent over the side of the vessel in search of seals. 179 men altogether. 126 of that number headed in the general direction of another vessel, the Stefano, under Captain Abram Kane. They thought they were supposed to spend the night there, but Captain Abram Kane put them back over the side of the Stefano to walk back to their own vessel, the Newfoundland. As we know, they never made it. Engulfed by a spring storm, they wandered in small bands for 2 whole days. One of those days, the 31st of March, saw a savage storm move in. By the time the storm relented, 79 of the men from the Newfoundland were dead on the ice. It was a tragedy that said much about the divisions between classes, much about the pursuit of money by a merchant class that figured lost lives as part of the cost of doing business. It was a tragedy that began 79 years ago today, March 30th, 1914.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
NTV in Canada. A match made in heaven.
Well, that's it for our look back at the top news stories from the week ending April 2nd, 1993. I'm Fred Hutton. For all of us here at NTV News, thanks for watching. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.
That's it for this edition of NTV's Calling from Newfoundland. We would appreciate hearing from you and any video showing you as you carry out your duties, perhaps even assembled to watch this program, plus any ideas you have for improving it. Our address is Calling from Newfoundland, care of NTV, P.O. Box 2020, St. John's, Newfoundland, Canada, A1C 5S2. Until next time, may the good Lord watch over you wherever you are and your loved ones at home.